know stuff. He brings them all together and he says, I had a dream and I need to know what the dream means. And they said exactly what you would expect them to say. They said, no problem, king. Tell us the dream and we'll interpret it for you. I mean, anybody can do this. So the king, he apparently has an IQ, he says, no, you tell me the dream, and then I'll know you can give me the interpretation. That was a smart move on his part, wasn't it? Wasn't it? Do you agree? He said, listen, no, I'm not going to tell you the dream. You'll just make up anything. If you can give me the right interpretation, apparently I think you can also tell me what I dreamed if you've got those kind of powers going on. And of course they couldn't. And so of course the king, ruthless dictator that he was, he said, okay, then all of you are going to be cut into little pieces and your houses are going to be burned to the ground unless you can tell me my dream and the interpretation. And so he sends out his army to begin gathering up all the wise men of the kingdom, all the university professors and academics and everybody who supposedly knows things, and he's going to destroy all of them. And the soldiers come to the little slave apartment of Daniel and his 3 friends. They're new slaves in Babylon, but they obviously gave some evidence of intelligence, and they were put with the university. They were put with Babylon's university, and they were going to be maximized for the king's use as wise men. So there they were, being tutored and educated. And the soldiers say, hey, we have no choice, but you're going to be executed. And Daniel asks why, and they tell him why. And he obviously wasn't, as a new young man in the kingdom, he wasn't one of the wise men that was brought before the king and asked for the dream and the interpretation. And Daniel does something remarkable in this story. Daniel says to the soldiers, hey, let me talk to my God and tell the king that I'd like to talk to him. Daniel says to the king in so many words, I can tell you the dream and the interpretation. But then Daniel says something that you don't expect. There's no arrogance here. He says, but the truth is, it's not me. I can't tell you anything. But if I pray to my God and he wants to divulge, he'll divulge, and you'll know. And the story unfolds where Daniel stands before Nebuchadnezzar and he says, God has come through for you, king. Apparently he likes you. Apparently, let's pause and step out of the message for a moment. Who is Nebuchadnezzar anyway? Well, he's a ruthless, murderous dictator. But also, you know who he is? He's a human being. He's a human being who has gone desperately wrong. And God loves him. God's eye is upon Nebuchadnezzar. As the story continues to unfold, we find out that there's a reason why God gave the dream to Nebuchadnezzar and not to one of his prophets like Daniel or Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or some other prophet. God gave a prophetic dream to a ruthless dictator. Are you hearing me? Why the ruthless dictator? Why did he get the prophecy? Well, as the story unfolds straight into chapter 4, you discover why. Because through prophecy, God is tapping this king on the shoulder and whispering into his consciousness, I see you, I know you, and I love you. And as the story comes to a conclusion, we are absolutely and utterly blown away because King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian dictator that has been mowing down nations in his path with violence and war and taking people into slavery, Nebuchadnezzar, through this dream and its interpretation, becomes a follower of the one and only true God. He converts and he comes to love the King of Kings. You and I don't like Nebuchadnezzar. I don't blame us. But the day is coming when you and I will stand with him before Jesus, and Jesus will say, I know he's pretty dysfunctional, but he's mine. And through prophecy, I was able to save him. And you and I will be friends with Nebuchadnezzar for all eternity. Well, back to the vision now, because this young man, this Hebrew slave, stands before this king, and he says, King, God has come through for you. In your dream, you saw a big statue. You saw an image, didn't you? Well, the king now knows what? This is the real deal. Because that's exactly what go on, Daniel. And in the dream, you saw this image, and it was kind of a strange image because it was made of all different kinds of materials. The head was gold, right? Nebuchadnezzar's, yep. And then the arms, silver, the chest and the arms, yeah. And then the belly and the thighs were brass, and then iron, and then the feet were a mixture of iron and clay. And then a big rock came straight out of the sky and hit the image at the feet and ground it to powder, and it blew to the wind. And then that rock grew to a great mountain. Isn't that what you saw, Nebuchadnezzar? And the king is blown away. That's exactly what I saw. What does the king know now? Whatever this young Hebrew slave tells me as the interpretation, it's going to be what? It's going to be right on the money. It's going to be true. It's going to be the real thing, because he could tell him the dream in advance. And so then the king is leaning forward on his throne, and he says, okay, that's the dream. What about the interpretation? What does this mean? And here Daniel just gets right to the point. This is the dream, verse 36 of chapter 2. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. What do you think the king is thinking right then when he's giving this introduction? He's like, get on with it. What does it mean? No flowery words to begin, like my introduction tonight. You're like, come on, Ty, get on with it. I'm hungry. That kind of thing. He is on the edge of his throne. He wants to know, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? And then Daniel immediately says, okay, king, here it is. You, the king of Babylon and the kingdom of Babylon, you are this head of gold. It's you. Now what is the king thinking? Exactly. Head, gold, that's me. I'm Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody knows I'm the man. Now when you're in chapter 4 later on, you get a snapshot of Nebuchadnezzar's character, and you know that there is so much pride in his heart about this. When Daniel says, you're the head of gold, yep. In chapter 4, he's standing on his veranda, and he's looking out over Babylon, and he says, quote, is this not great Babylon which I have built? And the emphasis is on I, as in me, myself, and I, as in Nebuchadnezzar is the greatest. But back here in chapter 2, there is a glitch in the system. Because it's only the head that is made of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar has to be, he's got some deductive reasoning skills, doesn't he? This is the same guy who said to the wise men and the soothsayers, no, you tell me the dream so I know the interpretation is true. This guy has some deductive reasoning skills. When he is told, you're the head of gold, what do you think he's also thinking at that point? Well, we know what he's thinking because later on, he makes his own image. And the image from head to foot is all of gold. That's what you read in the book of Daniel. He defies the historical succession of kingdoms, and by building an image of gold, he's essentially saying, what? Babylon rocks, and it's never going to end. I am great King Nebuchadnezzar. My kingdom is awesome. And it's going to go on and on and on, straight from the head down to the toes. It's never going to end. That's what he believes. And God is in the process of tapping him on the shoulder and humbling him and saying, you're just the head of gold. You are awesome, but I'm the one who made you the king of Babylon. I'm the one that sets up kings and takes them down. You're not as great as you think you are. In fact, you're kind of ruthless and mean, and you need to be born again. And God leads this king through the whole process of becoming a new creature, so that when we get to chapter 5, he is in love with the King of Kings. Nebuchadnezzar is told by Daniel straight up, you're the head of gold. This is Babylon. This is the kingdom of Babylon that ruled from 605 BC straight through 539. You know the numbers are going smaller on that side of history. That's not a mistake. But after you, and this is what Nebuchadnezzar does not want to hear, but after you, after Babylon, after Nebuchadnezzar, but after you, verse 39, shall arise another kingdom, and yes, it'll be inferior to yours. It's silver, your gold. It's an inferior metal. It's symbolized by an inferior metal. But nevertheless, even though it is an inferior kingdom in some regards, history is going to tilt in the direction of a second kingdom that's going to overcome even great Babylon. And this, the history books tell us, all you have to do is Google it. Ask Google. My wife says she knows everything. I don't know why she thinks that Google's a she. I don't know that that's the case, but Google it. And what was the kingdom that conquered Babylon? It was Media-Persia. And Media-Persia ruled from 539 straight up through 331 BC. But then, what happened? This is a remarkable prophecy, because Daniel goes on and he says, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. There is some specification here that the next kingdom after Media-Persia is going to cover some ground. It's going to be a kingdom that is reaching out and ruling a large, expansive geographic territory. If you read Daniel's prophecies, you discover that, and you compare it with history, that in fact Media-Persia was conquered by none other than that young Greek king, Alexander the Great. The kingdom of Greece, foretold in advance, ruled from 331 to 168 BC. And then Daniel went on and he said, but after this, something else is going to happen. A fourth kingdom shall be as strong. The fourth kingdom shall be as strong as what? What's that word, everybody? Iron. That kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. This is none other than the iron monarchy of Rome, which rose to power to not only conquer Greece, but to absorb Greek culture and religion. And the Roman Empire began to envelop the world and was the longest reigning empire in history, if you take in both the pagan and the papal phase of the Roman Empire's rule. This is remarkable. This prophecy is stimulating faith inside of us. It's waking something up inside of us and saying, oh my, there is a God in the universe. And the same God that foretold all of this history through Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel in advance, the same God who foretold all of that in the same book that contains these prophecies, whispers into our hearts, I love you and I want to be friends with you. And so prophecy wakes that faith up inside of us and says, oh, this is incredible what's going on here. But then verse 41, whereas, Daniel goes on talking to King Nebuchadnezzar, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, king, you saw that, right? Yeah, I saw that. Well, the kingdom will be divided. Just like the feet on the statue has 10 toes, It's going to be divided, and that's exactly what happened in history. Again, all you have to do is a little bit of historic reading, and you discover that the Roman Empire stands alone in history. Listen carefully now. The Roman Empire stands alone in history in this succession of empires in a distinctive role. Because every other empire was conquered by another, but not Rome. Rome imploded from the inside through moral corruption and political intrigue and political elections that people got all disgusted about and didn't know what to do or who to vote for. And it got really weird, and people were like, we're all over social media trying to figure out throughout the whole empire what in the world is going on in this world. There's not even a good choice. It's so corrupt. Sound familiar? That's what happened in Rome. And in the Roman Empire, another kingdom didn't come and pounce upon Rome. Rome just began to crumble and divide, and invading tribes from the north, the Germanic tribes, and invading tribes from the west, from the islands of the sea, Britain and Ireland, the Gauls began to come, and all of it began to implode, and it became weak through internal corruption and political intrigue. And so what happened? Europe that we have today, the very Europe that we have today, is the divided Roman Empire. It was all one big, massive power trip under the Caesars. And then gradually the whole thing began to implode, not explode, implode on itself. And as it did, we got the divided nations of Europe. And then Daniel said something interesting. This is a fascinating detail that is thrown in there in the prophecy. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Divided Europe is going to be a series of stronger and weaker nations constantly vying for power against one another. And that is exactly what happened. The Roman Empire divided in the western half. The Western Roman Empire divided, just as Daniel's prophecy foretold, into 10 basic empires or nations. The Alemanni were the Germans, the Burgundians, the Swiss, the Franks, the French, the Lombards, the Italians, the Saxons, the British or the English, and then the Suevi, the Portuguese, the Visigoths, the Spanish, and then 3 more kingdoms to make up the 10, the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. I just showed you a map that you can just Google, divided Roman Empire, and the old map will come up with all these old names, and you will discover the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals right there on Google. They all became extinct because they were squashed out of existence by the papal Roman Empire that came in to the position of the fallen Roman Empire. We'll talk about that on a future night. And Daniel goes on and says in verse 43, after taking us right down to the feet and the toes, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, king, they, that is these nations, these divided nations of Western Europe, the divided Roman Empire, they will mingle with the seed of men. What is that? That is a prophecy that foretold in advance that the divided Roman Empire would try to cohere together through the intermarrying of monarchs and their princes and princesses. Down through history, there would be an effort to mingle seed or genetics in order to forge a single, solitary, united European nation. But what did the prophecy go on to say? But they will not, even through intermarriage, They will not adhere to one another, just as iron and clay does not mix. Isn't this just astounding? All these years in advance, and we are living in a world today that has the very geography and political structure that the prophecy foretold we would have. And over again, there were efforts down through history after the fall of the Roman Empire to create a united Europe. First of all, Charlemagne did his best. Charles V tried. Louis XIV, Napoleon, with all his maniac narcissism and bloodshed, he tried ever so hard to create a united Europe. And then Hitler, with his final solution, his gas chambers and his Holocaust, tried to create a single solitary European empire under German control, and he failed. The prophecy can't be defied, no matter how hard people try. And he goes on, Daniel does, telling King Nebuchadnezzar, check this out, king. And in the days of these kings, this is crucial, do not miss this. In the days of these kings, that is, the divided European nations, when that kind of political structure is established and nobody can unite it, and Europe continues to be fragmented, and it can't be brought together as one, in the days of divided Rome, in the days of the European nations, in other words, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed like all the others, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people like all the other kingdoms. It shall break, this final kingdom that God will establish post-Europe, post-divided Rome. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it, God's kingdom, will stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw, king, that the stone, there was a stone that was, notice this language, cut out of the mountain without what? Hands. And that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to you, to the king Nebuchadnezzar, what will come to pass after this, down through history. And then Daniel closes with this, because he has confidence in his God. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar, one more thing I want to say. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Everything I just told you is exactly what's going down in history, king. You're the head of gold, then Media-Persia, then Greece, then Rome, then divided Europe, then efforts to unite Europe, and then sometime post-divided Europe, the time in which we live. As certainly as everything that was foretold in this prophecy came to pass, you can be absolutely certain that God is going to establish an eternal kingdom that will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will be of an entirely different character that is described as a stone cut out of the mountain without hands. Now notice this language carefully. You watched, Daniel told him earlier, we're backing up now, you watched, king, while a stone was cut out of without hands, there's that language again, and it struck the image at the feet of iron and clay, and it broke it in pieces. Notice the language without hands. Now this is brilliant, what's revealed to us here. Follow it. Cut without hands. That's very strange language. Without hands. Well, Daniel 8:25 interprets the Aramaic slightly differently, And it says without human means. Without hands means without human means, or without human methods. And what are the human methods by which all the other kingdoms are operating and governing and ruling? How is it that in the succession of empires that one empire falls to another? Without hands means without the force of war, without the process of coercion. The God of heaven operates on an entirely different paradigm of power. That's the real thing that's revealed. Jesus, when he did come to the world the first time, and he's coming the second time, just as the prophecy foretold. When Jesus came the first time, his character was put on display for us. When Jesus came, if you read the 4 Gospels, Jesus was the king nobody expected. They, at his time, including his own nation, the Jewish nation, and the whole world that he lived in and knew, was dominated by the Roman Empire, the 4th kingdom, the kingdom of iron. When Jesus came into the world, his disciples and all of Israel was looking for a certain kind of Messiah. What kind of Messiah did they want? They wanted a Messiah that would pounce with military might upon the Romans, liberate Israel, exalt Israel as a military political power, and that Messiah, they hoped, would sit upon a throne and rule the nations with the precise kind of power that had been used all along down through history. But no, the stone metaphor is unique. A stone cut without hands hits the image of the feet. The stone metaphor, according to Scripture, is telling us something. It's a symbol. It is cut without hands because it is not by human methodologies that Jesus will rule. Remember Jesus. We read earlier tonight, he's the kind of guy who says, and he's God, he's the kind of God who says, I don't want power over you. I want what? Friendship with you. So I'm going to communicate with you. I don't want you to be my slaves. I'm not Nebuchadnezzar. I'm not Caesar. I'm not Alexander the Great. I don't want to dominate you. I love you. I want you to be my friends. So this Jesus is symbolized by the stone, cut without hands. And the symbol brings to our mind the fact that love is more powerful than hate. That in fact, humility crushes pride. That in fact, mercy triumphs over all the merit systems of our world that require us to measure up in order to be accepted and loved. Jesus comes into the world not requiring that we measure up in order that he might love us. He comes into the world loving us in order that we might measure up. Jesus comes loving us to empower us